The marble floors of the imperial palace were polished smooth with the sweat of 100 slaves, and the air was thick with the scent of rose petals and dread. At the center of it all sat the young emperor, a boy wearing the power of a god, his eyes glittering with a dangerous, unstable mischief. This night, a grand banquet was not a celebration. It was a cage. The guests, senators, generals, the most powerful men in Rome, drank the finest wine, but every sip tasted of fear. They laughed when they were told to laugh, but the sound was thin, brittle like glass about to shatter. Because at this table, honor was a fragile, dangerous thing. And tonight, the price of the emperor's amusement would be paid not with gold, but with the dignity and heart of a senator's wife. What happens when a sacred Roman virtue, the honor of a noble family, is served up as the main course at the emperor's dinner party? This is the story of the twisted spectacles of Emperor Elagabalus and the horrifying silence of the men who let it happen. Watch all the way to the end. There's so much valuable info waiting for you. Don't forget to subscribe, tap like, and share this video. Every bit of support helps our channel grow and inspires us to make even better videos for you. The night arrived under a sky black as pitch, which seemed to swallow the light even of the moon. Inside the emperor's golden house, the atmosphere was thick, shimmering, and strangely quiet despite the hundreds of people moving through the halls. This was not a quiet of peace, but a dangerous stillness that comes right before a storm. The grand dining hall, the triclinium, was a masterpiece of Roman excess. Silver platters the size of shields were piled high with exotic foods, flamingo tongues, peacock brains, and fish from seas far away. Slaves in fine, perfumed tunics moved like ghosts, refilling cups with wine that cost more than a senator's yearly wage. Everything smelled of roses, expensive perfume, and, underneath it all, the cold sweat of fear. At the very center of this grand stage, propped up on silken cushions, was the Emperor Elagabalus. He was still a boy, barely 18 years old, but he commanded the vast Roman Empire with the casual cruelty of a child pulling the wings off a fly. His robes were silk, embroidered with real gold, and his crown was more jewels than metal. He looked beautiful, fragile, and utterly terrifying. Tonight's dinner was not just food. It was a performance, and the entire Senate of Rome were the unwilling actors. The most important guests, the senators and their wives, reclined uneasily on their couches. These men were the pillars of Rome, the judges and lawmakers who had built the republic and now served the empire. They should have felt safe, respected, and honored. But here, in the emperor's presence, they were simply his audience. They knew the rules. Smile when he smiled, laugh when he laughed, and never, ever cross him. The penalty for upsetting the emperor was not just the loss of your job. It was the loss of your life and often the lives of everyone you loved. Tonight, Elagabalus was especially mischievous. His eyes darted around the room, settling on one person, then another, looking for a target. The men were quiet, sipping their wine too quickly, pretending to be deeply interested in the marble patterns on the floor. But the women, the wives of the senators, were the ones truly exposed. In Roman society, a woman's honor was the very foundation of her family's name. It was sacred, guarded, and kept hidden behind the walls of their private homes. The Senate's power was built on the reputation and dignity of their wives. But Elagabalus had a dark, wicked pleasure in taking what was sacred and dragging it into the vulgar, blinding light of his public stage. He didn't just want to control the senators' politics. He wanted to destroy the very thing that made them who they were, their honor. And he knew that the quickest, most humiliating way to do that was to use their wives. The whole room felt the shift in the air when the emperor raised a hand. The music stopped instantly, Every senator's heart began to pound against his ribs, a frantic, silent drumbeat in the sudden, echoing silence of the dining hall. The performance was about to begin, and everyone knew that one of the women present was about to become the star of a tragedy she could never have prepared for. The true power of the emperor was not in his armies, but in his ability to freeze the blood of the most powerful men in Rome with a simple, knowing smile. And that smile was now aimed directly at a senator named Publius, and the beautiful, dignified woman reclining beside him. Her name was Livia. The sudden silence was crushing. Elagabalus lowered his hand slowly, letting the tension build until it was almost unbearable. He did not speak immediately. Instead, his dark eyes, heavily painted with kohl, drifted across the terrified faces of his guests. He seemed to savor the fear, drawing energy from the collective anxiety like a god drinking smoke from a sacrifice. Finally, his gaze landed on Livia. She was the wife of Senator Publius, a woman known for her quiet grace and sharp wit. But tonight, she was just another woman trapped by the purple robes of the emperor. She was beautiful, dressed in the modest but expensive robes befitting her station. She tried to meet his eyes with dignity, but a tiny, involuntary tremor ran through her hands, which were tightly clasped in her lap. Publius, her husband, felt his blood turn to ice. He was a man who had faced barbarian hordes on the edge of the empire, but now, facing a teenage boy on a silk couch, he was completely paralyzed. He wanted to reach for Livia, to pull her away, but his muscles refused to obey the command of his brain. Elagabalus finally spoke, his voice surprisingly soft, almost musical, which only made the words more venomous. "Senator Publius," he purred, leaning forward just slightly, "you have traveled widely, haven't you? You have seen the wonders of the East and the grim realities of the northern borders." Publius struggled to find his voice. "Why, yes, divine emperor," he stammered, his words catching in his throat. The title, divine emperor, felt like a mockery. "Tell me, Publius," Elagabalus continued, his smile widening dangerously, "of all the precious and rare things you have seen in your travels, what treasure do you value the most? Your great war horse? Your famous collection of Greek statues? Or perhaps, your wife?" The question was simple, but the meaning was devastating. It stripped Livia of her personhood, transforming her into one more object in Publius's collection. All eyes in the room now fell on Livia, analyzing her as if she were a statue up for auction. The other senators quickly looked down, pretending to cough or study their wine cups, desperate not to make eye contact with the emperor or Publius. Their silence was Livia's first betrayal. Publius swallowed hard. The correct answer, the one that would maintain his family's honor, was "my wife." But in the emperor's court, that was an insult, a suggestion that mere domestic life was more important than the emperor's favor. He had to choose between his family's reputation and his own life. "Divine emperor," Publius finally managed, forcing a thin, oily smile. "You yourself are the greatest treasure of Rome, and your favor is the only thing a true Roman values." He had successfully groveled, but at a terrible cost. He had just publicly suggested that his wife, his partner, was less valuable than the emperor's attention. Elagabalus ignored the flattery. He simply waved a hand toward Livia. "Indeed, but tonight we shall examine your other treasures. Livia, stand up." The request was a punch to the gut. Roman women of Livia's status never stood up in public at a banquet. They were there as background figures, not as performers. To stand was to make a spectacle of herself, to break the strict rules of propriety. Livia felt every eye like a physical weight pressing down on her shoulders. She looked at her husband, searching for a single sign of resistance, a word of protest, a plea to the emperor. She found only his pale, sweat-slicked face, eyes fixed on the floor. He was a broken man, silenced by fear. Slowly, agonizingly, Livia obeyed, rising to her feet to face the cruel, expectant smile of the emperor. The horror was complete. Her honor had just been traded for her husband's miserable survival. Livia stood, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. The beautiful hall, moments before a symbol of Roman power, now felt like a huge, echoey pit where dignity went to die. She was tall and carried herself well, which only made her a more impressive target for Elagabalus's twisted mind. She could feel the 100 pairs of eyes, the hungry eyes of the emperor's strange foreign favorites, the pitying eyes of the low-ranking guests, and the utterly blank, terrified eyes of the other senators and their wives. "Look at her," Elagabalus commanded, not loudly, but with a sharp, cutting tone that demanded absolute obedience. "Look at this treasure that Senator Publius values so highly, yet less than my fleeting attention." Livia's face was pale, but she held her chin high. She would not cry. She would not let this boy see the fear that was shaking her soul. This small act of defiance seemed to only fuel the emperor's cruel entertainment. He snapped his fingers. Immediately, 2 of his most favored Syrian guards stepped forward. They were huge, silent men, their presence alone a threat of violence. They carried no weapons, but they carried something far more dangerous. A small, intricately carved wooden pedestal, usually used to display a rare piece of ancient Greek sculpture. "Take your place, Livia," Elagabalus ordered, gesturing to the pedestal. Livia hesitated for a fraction of a second. To stand on the pedestal was to stop being a guest, a wife, or a woman. It was to become a statue, an object to be admired, or, more accurately, to be judged and mocked. But the look in the emperor's eye left no room for refusal. If she refused, her husband would pay the price, possibly with his life. With a strength she didn't know she possessed, she walked to the center of the hall and stepped onto the small, uncomfortable platform. Now she was truly exposed. The lights, the gold torches, and the silver lamps seemed to be focused entirely on her. She was framed by the dark, fearful faces of the most important men in Rome, all of whom were powerless to protect her. Elagabalus then began his cruel show, like an auctioneer presenting a prized but worthless item. "Observe the quality of the Roman senator's wife," he began, his voice dripping with false admiration. "Note the fine cloth, the careful embroidery, a masterpiece of Roman tradition. Yes." He paused, and a few of his sycophantic guests gave thin, nervous laughs. "But is she truly worthy of the attention? Is she truly priceless?" He signaled the 2 guards again. One guard, without a word, approached Livia and gently but firmly began to rearrange her hair. He moved the traditional Roman braids, usually worn up in a dignified style, and let them fall down her back, a style reserved for young, unmarried girls or dancers. This was a direct, public attack on her status as a respected married woman. The second guard took a string of cheap, gaudy glass beads, the kind common prostitutes wore, and draped them over her expensive, noble robes. The senators gasped, a sound quickly swallowed by the cavernous hall. This was not just rude, it was a civic injury. It was the emperor publicly stripping her of her identity and dressing her up as a cheap toy, a mockery of the Roman virtues she represented. Her husband, Publius, gripped his wine cup so hard that his knuckles turned white. He wanted to shout, to draw his hidden dagger, to do anything. But he looked at the emperor's smug face and then at the dark, silent guards lining the walls, and the raw, cold fear of death choked the words in his throat. He remained silent, allowing his wife to be stripped of her honor for his own survival. Livia, standing tall on the pedestal, now understood the full extent of her abandonment. The humiliation was not just the emperor's act. It was the entire Senate's silence. The men of Rome had just traded her honor for their miserable lives. The laughter started slowly, then grew louder. It wasn't genuine joy. It was a rough, forced noise, like a machine grinding rusted gears. The emperor's inner circle, the foreigners, the freed slaves, and the sycophants who benefited most from his madness, laughed loudest. The goal was to pressure the powerful Roman senators into joining the mockery. Elagabalus clapped his hands lightly, signaling the noise to stop. He looked specifically at the row of reclining senators. "Tell me, gentlemen of the Senate," he asked, his voice now playful, "does she pass the test? Does Senator Publius possess the finest specimen of Roman domestic virtue? Or is she, perhaps, a little ordinary?" A wave of dread washed over the entire room. This was the test. They couldn't just stay silent anymore. They had to speak, and their words had to agree with the emperor's cruel assessment. If they defended Livia, they were defying the emperor. If they remained silent, they were suggesting that the spectacle was unworthy of comment, an even greater insult. They were trapped. The first to break was an older senator named Cato, a man famous for his harsh judgments and strict traditional values. He was also a man who had borrowed heavily from the imperial treasury. Cato cleared his throat nervously. "Divine Emperor," he began, his voice shaking slightly, "she is passable, but as you have demonstrated, Her Imperial Majesty, she lacks the spark that only the divine court possesses. Perhaps a little too stiff." The room erupted in forced, grateful laughter. Cato had thrown Livia under the carriage, but he had survived. The pressure immediately shifted to the next senator. One by one, the leaders of Rome began to speak, each trying to outdo the last with a gentle, often veiled insult against Livia's appearance, her clothes, or her demeanor. They were not just insulting Livia. They were insulting the very idea of Roman family honor she represented, all to save their own skins. Livia stood on the pedestal, the glass beads resting heavily on her shoulders. Her face was expressionless, a mask of stone. But inside, her world was shattering. She could handle the emperor's cruelty. He was a monster. What she couldn't bear was the utter cowardice of her peers, the men who governed Rome. Their complicity was the true poison in the room. Publius, Livia's husband, still hadn't moved. The forced, mocking words of his colleagues were like whips cracking against his back. He was a wealthy man, a respected man, but here he was revealed to be a powerless, spineless ghost. He had a family to protect, an inheritance to pass on. He told himself that this humiliation, this civic injury, was a necessary price for their safety. But every insult aimed at Livia felt like a dagger twisting in his own soul, a self-inflicted wound that would never truly heal. Elagabalus watched this spectacle with sheer delight. He didn't care about Livia or her virtue. He cared about power. By forcing the senators to ridicule one of their own wives, he wasn't just amusing himself. He was breaking the senators' collective spirit. He was teaching them that their loyalty to him must always be stronger than their loyalty to their own families, their own values, or their own honor. The humiliation of Livia was not a personal attack. It was a political maneuver. It was the emperor ensuring that every powerful man in that room knew, deep in his gut, that he was utterly dependent on the imperial whim. The price of their life was the public surrender of their honor, and by the time the last senator had offered his sneering comment, Livia's spirit, and the dignity of the Roman Senate, lay in ruins on the polished marble floor. The banquet finally ended near dawn. Elagabalus, tired of his game, had simply waved his hand, dismissing the entire assembly with a gesture that said, "The show is over. You may go." Livia stepped down from the pedestal. The cheap glass beads were still draped over her gown. She removed them slowly, her fingers trembling, and dropped them onto the marble floor. They made a small, pathetic clatter that was instantly lost in the noise of servants cleaning up the feast. She didn't look at her husband. Publius rushed to her side, his face a mask of shame and fear. "Livia, he began, reaching out for her hand. She flinched away from his touch, a movement so slight that only he could notice it. "Do not touch me, Publius," she said, her voice a low, cold whisper that was more painful than any shout. "Not tonight. Not after that." He tried to plead. "You know I had no choice. He would have had me executed. Our sons." Livia finally looked at him. Her eyes were dry, but they held a look of profound, chilling emptiness. "Your life, Publius, was purchased tonight, purchased with the honor of your house, and the price was too high. You did not save your life. You merely saved your breath, and you paid for it with my soul." They left the palace in a closed litter, riding through the empty streets of Rome. But the peace of the night was an illusion. The city was silent, but the story was already spreading like wildfire. Gossip in Rome was faster than the fastest horse. By sunrise, every servant, every merchant, every soldier would know what Elagabalus did to Senator Publius's wife. When they arrived at their magnificent home, it felt cold and alien. The house was a symbol of their power, their stability, their Roman identity. Now it felt like a hollow shell. Livia went straight to her private rooms and did not emerge for days. The civic injury was immediate and devastating. Roman society was deeply rooted in reputation. For a senator, his dignity/prestige, and fame/reputation, were everything. Livia had been publicly dishonored, not by a common man, but by the emperor with the active agreement of her husband and colleagues. This meant that the stain was permanent. Publius realized the horror of what he had done the next morning when he tried to conduct business. His clients were polite, but their eyes were distant. His fellow senators avoided him in the forum, or spoke only in quick, whispered greetings before rushing away. The unspoken message was clear: you are weak. You let your wife be shamed to save your own skin. You have no honor left. The humiliation was designed to undermine the senator's political standing. If a man couldn't protect his own household, how could he protect the Republic? His political power, which relied entirely on the respect of his peers, vanished overnight. His friends stopped coming for dinner. His family name, once proudly spoken, was now whispered with pity and contempt. Livia, the true victim, suffered in silence. The physical act of standing on the pedestal was brief, but the psychological scar was deep. She became a prisoner in her own house, refusing to go out, convinced that every passing person knew her story and was laughing. Her relationship with Publius was broken beyond repair. She had been publicly betrayed by the one person who was sworn to protect her. The gold and marble of their home had become a cage, not of velvet and ice, but of shame and unforgivable silence. Their domestic life, the sacred, private foundation of their Roman identity, had been ripped open and destroyed by the cruel whim of a boy emperor who understood exactly how to break a powerful man, by first breaking his wife. Elagabalus's reign of terror, built on cruelty and spectacle, could not last forever. While the senators at the banquet had been too afraid to challenge him openly, their collective fear slowly curdled into bitter, cold hatred. They had bowed, they had laughed, and they had betrayed their wives, but they never forgot the shame he forced upon them. The destruction of domestic honor was simply the last straw for Rome's elite. The emperor had overreached. His endless, bizarre public performances, not just involving senators' wives, but also his strange religious practices and his lavish, uncontrollable spending, alienated the one group he needed to control, the soldiers of the Praetorian Guard. These soldiers were Rome's true kingmakers. They were loyal only to power, and they grew tired of an emperor who treated their traditional values with contempt. A different woman, the emperor's shrewd grandmother, Julia Misa, orchestrated his downfall. She realized her grandson's madness was destroying their dynasty. She began subtly shifting the loyalty of the Praetorian Guard towards Elagabalus's younger, more stable cousin, Severus Alexander. The end came swiftly, less than 4 years after the spectacle in the triclinium. On a cold morning in March of 222 AD, the Praetorian Guard, fed up with the chaos and disrespect, revolted. They burst into the palace, dragged the teenage emperor from his hiding place, and executed him. His body, along with the body of his mother, was dragged through the streets of Rome, the same streets where he had forced noble women into humiliation, and finally thrown into the Tiber River. The jester king who mocked the dignity of Rome was himself reduced to a public spectacle of contempt. But the story doesn't end with the emperor's death. The terrible silence of the senators at the banquet left a deeper scar on Rome than Elagabalus's few years of rule. Livia and Publius continued to live in their grand house, but their marriage remained a cold monument to the night of betrayal. Publius's career never truly recovered. He was forever seen as the man who valued his position over his family's honor. He survived the emperor, but he lost his respect, his wife's love, and his soul. The story of Livia and the other senators' wives became a chilling historical lesson. It showed that tyranny is not just about the monster on the throne. It is also about the powerful men who enable the monster with their silence. The senators, the supposed guardians of Roman law and tradition, chose self-preservation over courage. They were powerful enough to have stood together, perhaps, but they chose to be broken one by one, watching passively as their wives became weapons used against them. This incident, often recorded in the history books alongside other bizarre excesses, serves as a dark reminder of what happens when power becomes completely unbalanced. When an emperor's whim could instantly destroy the sacred foundations of domestic life, it meant that no law, no tradition, and no personal dignity was safe. Elagabalus's banquets were a stage for terror, and the horrifying truth of those nights was not just the emperor's cruelty, but the collective, paralyzing fear that silenced the most powerful voices in the Roman Empire. They allowed their own honor to be served up as a feast, and in doing so, they ensured that the memory of their shame would outlive the very emperor who had inflicted it. The lesson of the Golden House remains clear. The biggest danger in a tyrant's court is not his anger, but your own cowardice.